So, without further ado, we will introduce Gayla Lee to share with us her artwork, a little bit about her studio, and about her classes as well. So, I'm going to spotlight you, and and then you're going to share your screen, but we'll spotlight you.
Okay, there we go. I'm looking at my own face. Well, hey everybody. So we're down here in my studio. I feel very fortunate that I found a house. I'm in downtown Fredericksburg, and I have a studio and a kiln and everything in my basement. It's pretty great. I'll start my slideshow in a second, but I wanted to show you guys, if you're not familiar with what the glass fusing and the kiln forming process is, we will start with sheets of glass. So that's what I have behind me, all different colors and sizes and textures. We'll use a glass cutter to cut pieces of this out. And then, sort of like stained glass, where you might solder two pieces of glass together, we actually take those pieces and we fire them together in a kiln. So that's kind of the simplest explanation. And if you guys have specific questions as we're showing images, just put them in the chat and I will see what I can do to answer it. All right, let's see. Share screen. Oh, it has me pick the window. Okay. All right, look, we can see all that. Then I've got to go to screen slideshow. Okay. So this is me 20 years ago over there in the orange. And this is the beginning of my glassblowing apprenticeship. I started as a glassblowing apprentice at the Cordetti Glass Studio in Baltimore in 2001. If we back up a little bit though, when I was 8 years old, I went to the Maryland Renaissance Festival with my sister and a friend. And we walk into the Renaissance Festival and they're headed for the pony rides. And I stop dead in my tracks right there in the front because I see the Glassblowers Pavilion, which is a thing I've never seen before. And I think I spent at least an hour planted in front of that thing that day. My sister and our friend went off to go do pony rides, and I just sat there and I said, I'm gonna do that. I wanna do that someday. If they had let me join the glassblowing circus when I was 8, I totally would have run away and done it. When I graduated high school, I moved to Baltimore. I grew up in Annapolis. I moved to Baltimore and I found a glassblower there. And I stopped in at the shop and said, hey, do you need any help? You know, I'll work for free. I'll sweep the floors. And he said, no. So every time I was in that neighborhood for the next year and a half, I would stop in, I'd watch them work, I'd chat a little bit. They would do demonstrations at festivals and things. And after about a year and a half, he said, hey, I'm going to need somebody starting in the fall. Would you like to come work for me? So this is the Cordetti Glass Studio in its old location on Holland Street. And this is where I did my apprenticeship. I worked for him for free for about 4 years. He traded me time in the glassblowing studio. I worked on a team as his assistant. I was the lowest assistant, the second assistant. In the picture there on the right is Reagan Sheridan. She was the main assistant. So she actually did the hands-on training for me. After about 2 years of just sort of helping him out and helping her out, I began to teach classes. And then after about 4 years, I started actually working as the paid main assistant. Glassblowing is pretty challenging. It takes a long time to be good at it. A lot of you guys have probably seen Blown Away on Netflix, so maybe you have an idea of the process. I never really got very sophisticated with it. I had to go dig in a box to find these pictures. You can see they're like scanned, printed photos from way back in the day. I tried a lot of things, but nothing really resonated. The sorts of things that I wanted to do work that had repeating patterns and geometry, and it was just not really something I was able to achieve with glassblowing. Glass is a liquid when you work with it in that process, so it's pretty difficult to do things that are rigid and patterned. It's also very expensive. You can't do it at home. You have to go to the studio. So I took classes at the Corning Museum of Glass while I was training, and I had seen glass fusing where glass was worked in a kiln. And I thought, oh, I'd like to try that. You know, maybe I can do something with that to bring it into my blown glass work. Well, I ended up liking it all on its own. So I took a class and I started working with it a little bit. I didn't have a kiln yet, so there wasn't a whole lot I could do. The guy that I studied with, Mark Ditzler, I spoke to him and asked if he needed a teaching assistant the next time that he came to Corning, and he said, sure. So I began teaching with him. And that's really where I got most of my education in glass fusing, was working with Mark, just, you know, teaching a class that was kind of the same, but the students always had different projects and different ideas. So we learned different things. This here is one of the first larger, sort of more sophisticated fused glass pieces that I made. And we've got an iridescent glass there where I sandblasted a pattern that's got those swirly lines and streams in it. And then the cherry blossoms are a copper foil that's sandwiched in between the layers. This is the kind of thing that I wanted to do that would have just been very, very difficult to do with glass blowing. Jen asked about, oh, and here's some more copper foil cherry blossoms, just a simpler dish. The glass fusing process doesn't work as well for large three-dimensional work. So it's definitely more flat kinds of pieces, things that you can imagine that you are shaping them with gravity in the kiln. I'll have some process photos a little bit later. I tried just lots of techniques. This one, I actually carved those black lines into the glass with a sandblaster, and it took forever. When I was a kid, my father was a cabinet maker, so I spent a lot of time growing up in the wood shop, and I just kind of like wood grain patterns. You'll see it in there a couple of times. A lot of these things were pieces that I made as I was a teaching assistant for this guy, Mark Ditzler, in Corning. Tried a bunch of techniques. This technique is, we call these pattern bars, and I don't know how big the screen that I'm on, but we basically make a bar, if you guys look up here, that is, the way I think of it is, it's like when you get the cookie dough from the store and it has the pattern in it and you slice the cookies off the log, right? And then you get like snowmen or whatever, except way hotter. So we make these out of sheet glass and then the patterns come out of them. Just tried all sorts of geometric things. This is a pattern here that would be totally impossible to do with glass blowing. Although it wasn't easy with glass fusing either, because that is, I think, what would it be? 288 squares. So lots of squares, different colors. And these are all made with the process I talked about in the beginning, where we have just sheets of glass that I've cut apart and melted together. I tried some different things. There's mica powder, just like you might use in other crafts. It's like that glittery powder, and it's relatively heat stable, so you can fire it in to fused glass. And I can't see the chat. Did somebody have a question? I thought I heard something. I don't hear it.
No, nothing in the chat yet.
Okay, cool. Just experiments with lines and color. I liked this one a lot. This one was a wedding present for a friend of mine. Sometimes I wish that I still had it. So this one has copper foil in between two layers of glass. So a lot of times people would see that at craft shows and say, wow, you must be a spectacular glass cutter. And I'm not. I have no idea how you would begin to cut that out of glass. What it is a green bottom layer, and then a strip of hand embossed copper foil, and then a clear layer that sits on the top of it. I believe there's a detail photo. Yeah. This is that same sort of design in the black and red and white one. And I hand embossed each squiggly line, because like I'm a crazy person who doesn't want to actually make any money from their artwork. It's a very meditative design though. I definitely like to do it. It starts out with copper foil that's just as bright as a penny, but when you heat it up in the kiln, it starts to oxidize. So you begin to get those colors that are like darker reds, purples, even all the way to black as you fire it. There's a clear layer of glass on the top of it. And if that wasn't there, it would just fire black, and it would be like black and flaky. One of the interesting things about when I do this is that the areas that are more, let's see, does this cursor work? Sure. More towards the interior, there's less air circulation in there. So the copper oxidizes less. So you tend to get brighter copper in the middle, and then it goes to like a darker red, a purple, or even a black as it goes out towards the edge. And I've enjoyed making those a lot. Here's one in white. The clear layer also has an iridescent coating on the top. So it's not a thing that's very easy to see in photographs, but if you can catch just a hint of a rainbow here, that is not a trick of the light. It does have like an iridescent rainbow top as well. You can sort of see that rainbow iridescent a little more there. With the black, it tends to photograph a little better. Photographing glass is a challenge. Some leaf shapes. I think we've got some more of those coming up. Some of these pieces were done with strips of glass cut on edge. So this is glass that's, let's see if I have something handy. Something small maybe. So all of our glass is handmade in Portland, Oregon. It's really cool. If you're ever there, you can get a tour of the factory. I don't know about during COVID, but certainly post-COVID. So a dish like that is made out of this glass. This glass at the factory, they mix two colors together, but then I cut it into narrow strips. And these pieces are actually made, you're looking at the cross section, the edge of the glass strips. It's very labor intensive, but I enjoy doing it. And this was just a series I did in a couple of different colors of functional dishes. This color combination in particular, I liked a lot. There's a lot of chemistry involved in glass, and the company that makes it tries to make it pretty consistent, but this color combination here, I've never been able to consistently buy glass where I could replicate all these colors well. So I don't really make them anymore. Here's some panels done in that same technique. Jen mentioned that she took my class at Maryland Hall for the Creative Arts in Annapolis. And this was, we had a show in, I think 2013, we had a glass show. So we had work from my students and a lot of work of mine. So this is from that show there. And then I also have done craft shows with this work. And someone saw some of these panels and it led to a commission that I got. So here I sent them a couple of sketches of different ways that we could have the lines in the panel. So this is a picture of them installed. And they were decorating somebody's living room. I feel like it was in Texas. You know, I never knew the client. I just worked through the art dealer there. Here's some more panels, that leaf motif again, which is challenging to cut, but a lot of fun to do. We're entering into the period of time now where I had a smartphone. So I thought, this is so much easier to take these pictures on my smartphone, but it's definitely not the quality of a real camera.
Gayla, can I jump in? There was a question. Do you use a saw to cut the glass?
Sometimes, but not for these kinds of things. So these kinds of things are just done with sheet glass. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen it done before, but we have a glass cutter. Of course, I don't have one within arm's reach, which would have been the smart thing to do. You make a scratch on the glass, and then you attempt to break it along that score, and the pieces just break. So you end up with, cut smaller pieces of glass. When you fire them in the kiln, they'll stick together depending on the temperature that you go to. Like these panels are textured. So this is what we call a tack fuse. So they're actually raised and very tactile, but you can also fire things hotter. And then they're more smooth. When we make these bars, when the glass is thicker, we do have to cut this with a wet saw. And we use the same kind of saw you'd use for a tile, but we usually put a more expensive blade on it, a higher quality blade. So then I started using some glass blowing stuff in with the glass fusing. The kind of glass that you normally use for glass blowing is not the same kind of glass as the sheet glass. They have the same basic formula, but they are a little too dissimilar. If you fire them together, they can crack apart. So you sort of do glass blowing, but in a slightly different technique because you're working with a different glass. So the white squares in here, and I will show you guys a slideshow about this, are made in these bars, which I don't know if you can see. And this is basically just taking the glass, fusing glass and doing regular sort of glass blowing techniques where I layered colors. I had melted pots, one of white and one of clear. And I layered the white on and then a layer of clear over it and then white and then clear. And then I made it into a square and I stretched it out into this bar. This is a similar technique if you've seen how they make the hard candies that have the little design inside. I really like these white squares. I made a whole bunch of these. I actually did this during my residency at the Corning Museum of Glass, and I have like half of one of those shoebox containers full of them still, but it's the end. I probably won't make more. These were also fired, so they retained a little texture. So they had a really nice tactile quality to them. And all these flat ones here are wall panels. The process also lends itself well to jewelry. I had worked over the years on different ways to make wood grain patterns. So I had tried sandblasting it. I embossed that copper. But this stuff here, I made one of these glass bars. Not to be mysterious, the slideshow's coming up for it. And I cut it, and depending on how you cut it, you have a different view of the cross section that's in it. And I was trying to make more of like a spiral pattern. Like, this was not there. There you go. If you guys can see that. But instead of cutting the slices off this way, and I did that with a wet saw, I cut it this way. And inside was this amazing wood grain pattern. The initial plan had been to use it in something larger, but the little slices were just so great on their own. So I started making jewelry because they were too cool. They were too cool all by themselves. The blue ones were really nice. And it led to lots of other designs. Here's a design like the white bar that's like an amber and a white. I don't really have any training for making jewelry. It's something that I lack, and hopefully one day I'll take a jewelry class, but I made little metal rivets to hold these together. This kind of glass, you don't want to heat it up unevenly, so I can't really solder anything around it. So it has to be all like cold connections, things that are bent, no soldering, no casting, anything like that for the metal. These triangles were really cool. I was not sure I could make a triangle. Triangle, if you think about trying to make a triangle out of a liquid, right? Because while you do the glass blowing part of this, it is a liquid. It's challenging for sure, but it worked. I love these. There's a close-up of them. And there's a little tube rivets there. This one, let's see, I think I have a piece of this bar from a different end. You guys can see it there. Those earrings may be right from this bar that I'm holding. Some squares. This is just another one where I was playing with ways to manipulate the glass and the layers, and I was seeing what patterns I would get depending on how I cut the pieces apart. So these two things are from the same bar of glass, just cut in a different orientation. And that's the same as the black and white, just different colors. Here are some of these white and clear ones, but in kind of a swirly, amorphous way. This was a mistake initially. I meant to make them round, and there was part of the bar that just got kind of mangled. And initially, there's a lot of things with this where I was initially disappointed by some sort of mistake. And then I realized that it was actually really cool and would be good on its own. These circle ones were really fun. Okay, now I have, let's see if I can figure out how to do this. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second because I believe that I have to share a different screen. I found out that I already had a presentation put together. So this is about making the bars that I use for the jewelry. They each have a different pattern that you use, but this will give you guys the basic idea. So I'll read it aloud. I don't know if anyone's on a small screen. Making cane and Marini in the hot shop. And those are the names for some of these bars. I think it's gonna play on its own, perhaps, maybe not. So here are, some of these photos are from a class. So I don't think any of these bars are mine. These are all bars that students made. So we made them out of sheets of glass, just like the ones that are behind me, and we pre-fused them into a block. Then we cooled them down, cleaned them up, and we put them in a smaller oven, and we heated them up to a lower temperature, it says 1050 degrees. That's a temperature where the glass is hot enough that it's not going to thermal shock. It's not going to break. If you guys have ever taken like a glass plate out of the refrigerator and, gotten hot water on it and it cracked, or had something hot, put it in cold water, that's because the glass is being heated unevenly, and that'll make it break. So we need to preheat them gently. Once they're over 1,000 degrees, though, you can kind of do whatever you want with them. So they are picked up on a small amount of hot glass. I guess I could read my actual subtitles, though they're partially blocked here. And this is in the glassblowing studio at the Corning Museum of Glass, which is fabulous. I shape it into a square so that it fits the back of the cane blocks. And this glass starts out as a liquid but cools rapidly. I heat it to a temperature where it's hot enough to be sticky, but not so hot that it's a liquid, so that when I reach in with this pipe into the little kiln, it will stick to the block and I can pull the block out. And then I begin heating it. If I let it cool off too much, it'll crack. If I'm not careful in how I heat it, it will get sort of twisted and blended. And what I do as I heat it is I just try to maintain the square shape until the glass is heated all the way through. Right now it's sort of liquidy on the outside, but it still is very solid and inflexible in the middle. Once I get it hot all the way through, then I can begin to do whatever manipulation that I want to it. In this one, I'm cutting into the middle and I'm sort of pinching the middle together, but there's lots of other techniques where I might stretch it out and fold it. I might poke it, which is how we get those ones that have the concentric circles, the black and white ones. I might twist it. So you can see I've got a pinch coming in that side. You see all the layers in the cross section here. Oh, I cannot do a cursor on this. So then I reshape it into a square, and it is a liquid, so it's getting kind of stretchy and hot. And then now I turned it, oh, this is a slideshow of two things. This one stayed a square. This one was a round one. So you guys have to use your imagination a little bit. But you smooth it out and you reshape the edges, and I make a little knob on the end. And this is going to be a place where I can grab the bar, because right now this thing is like 2 or 3 inches across. It's cool. I could cool it off and slice it up, but it's not going to be good for jewelry or small patterned pieces. I get it really hot and I dip the end, that knob that I made, in some cold water, which chills it just enough that I can grab it. So I've got the shears there and I'm grabbing that knob and stretching it out. And then it stretches out into a bar. If I want them thicker, I leave the bar shorter. If I want them thinner, I can pull it really skinny. And then you have to let it cool off for just a little bit. Again, we want it so that it's not a liquid now, but we can't let it drop below 1,000 degrees because then it'll start to break. Once it's cooled off enough, I will break it off the pipe, and then it goes into another oven where it will gradually cool down the rest of the way. So there's a cross section of it, not the most attractive colors. So that's Marini, and Marini is a glass pattern where we make it and we want to view it in this orientation. But there's another way of glass working where we make cane. Cane is glass that we make so that we view it in this orientation along its side. And I believe I've got a little movie of that. Yeah, here we go. So there's a whole bunch of colored cane. And here's some things I fused them into. You can use that cane for glass blowing, but when you make it with the compatible glass, you also get to use it in glass fusing. And we'll see some photos later where I've got the cane. Okay. So this is me and my friend Janet at the Corning Museum. I've already put the 2 colors in there, but it was just a flat, white on one side, green on the other. She's brought me a pipe and I stuck my glass to her pipe. And now we're going to twist and walk backwards from each other. If we go too fast, it will become too skinny and thin, and it'll either break or we'll lose control over it and it'll spread onto the floor. If we don't go fast enough, it'll stay rather thick. If we don't turn enough, you just kind of get straight lines. Both of us are twisting really, really quickly. I had made a lot of these this day. They did not all go well, but luckily when my friend was filming us, I got like the best pull of the whole day. I think I got like 20 feet out of this one. So you can see it still is wobbling a little. It's setting up on the end that I'm holding. It's pretty rigid. Her end is still a little hot, and we just kind of are turning slower, slower, slower as it cools. Then we'll begin to just hold tension on it, just to keep it straight so that it doesn't sag in the middle. These are skinny, so we don't have to, actually, I may have put these back in the oven to cool down.
I will.
They're skinny enough, you don't have to. And then once they're cool, you can cut them up from there and fuse them into things, blow glass with them. I make little earrings out of the skinny ones. All right, I believe that's it for that. Okay, so now I have to close this and let me go back to my other slideshow. There it is. All right. Everybody following along? Have we had any other questions, Jen? And I can't hear you. I don't know.
I have to unmute myself. No, not yet. Not
Okay.
yet. We're just all fascinated.
All right.
I know I am.
Okay, so next, in 2010, I applied for and got a residency at the Corning Museum of Glass. They used to do about 6 artist residencies a year, 5 or 6. You have an entire month with the full studio at your disposal. I don't know if you guys gathered it from the pictures, but all of glassworking and glassblowing especially are very, very technical. They require a lot of equipment that's fancy, expensive, specialized, things you couldn't have in your home. So having that resource there, plus having the museum to do research, and they also have a glass library, is a really amazing opportunity. For my proposal, I wanted to make more of these Marini, more of these cross-section pattern pieces. For this particular piece, I wanted to see what was the most complex design that I could make from the simplest initial piece. So I wanted to do these things with diagonal stripes. So that was the starting point. In the proposal, I wasn't really sure where I was going to go with it, but I sketched out, you know, part of a tiling that I might make with these squares, and you know, thought I'd see where it went. So I was there for a month. I made 2 of these platters and I worked on them. It took an entire month. You know, it wasn't all day of every day, but just with things heating and cooling, this was the length of time that it took. So I cut sheets of glass and I made a big giant pattern bar. So this one is about 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches by maybe like 18 inches long. After it was fired into a block, we cut it down into slabs. And after the slabs were cut, I don't know if you can see in the foreground there, we cut it into these diagonal slices like this. I did it this way because if I had actually put the glass in the kiln diagonally, the heat and the flow of the glass would have bent the lines. I would not have been able to actually get a straight diagonal line. It was definitely a lot of extra work. So here are some of these pieces tiled together. It was really difficult to remember what the pattern was and where I wanted things to be. I had to keep walking away and coming back because it just, probably to you guys and to me now, it looks like gibberish. It was a lot of pieces. There were about 400 individual pieces in each of these platters, and that's 400 slices of the bar, but each slice has 9 or 10 stripes in it. So it's actually like 4,000 pieces of glass. So there they are, laid out roughly into the shape that I want, and they're placed on a kiln shelf. I put them in the kiln and they fired overnight to about 1,500 degrees. When it came out, the edges were more ragged. I'm in the process of cutting. You can sort of see a little ragged chunk there. I'm in the process of cutting that off. Jen asked about what cold working was. Cold working is anything we do that's not done hot. It's all of our grinding, cutting with the wet saw. There's actually machines that'll carve and engrave glass. So all that kind of stuff is cold working. I don't really like to do it, but I like the way it looks. So I end up doing a lot of it. So I am on a large lapidary grinder grinding down. I think I cut off the big chunks on the wet saw, and now I'm grinding down the curvature on the edges here. And so there it is, fired together, but not glossy yet. I'll fire it again and shine it up a little bit. And then I made a mold because this thing is 19 inches across and it's an odd shape. So to give it shape, so it's not just a flat panel, we usually have a mold that we'll bend it into. There's a lot of commercially available molds, but not like this. I made one out of a mixture of plaster and silica. It's a little ugly there, but it did the trick. Because it was just a custom shape and size. So the plaster silica is usually only single use. I think I got 2 uses out of this. But the regular glass fusing molds are ceramic. So I made a blue one and a red one. And people would see them side by side and say, oh, I like the pattern in the blue one better. And I'd say, well, they're the same pattern. Depending on the angle that you view it, you get a different dominant pattern. It's something that can't really be captured in images. You know, for this one, I feel like most people see this dark blue kind of zigzag, right? This sort of dental zigzag. Whereas with this one, I think a lot of people see like either this zigzag here or like these diamonds there. So they were very, very cool. This one I did sell. Oh yeah. So I also have done a bunch of craft shows. The biggest craft show I did was the American Craft Council show in Baltimore, which happens in the Baltimore Convention Center. It's the largest indoor juried craft show in the country, or it was at the time, with I think up to 700 vendors. Jen, this is from the Capitol. So this one did eventually get sold to a friend of a friend. The blue one, however, died. I had it in a gallery and they had it on the wall, and it wasn't the shelf that the blue platter was on, but the one above it. One of the hangers broke free, and it all came tumbling down. You know, it's sad. They had insurance, so I did get paid for it, and I've got lots of good pictures of that. So, you know, oh well. When you do glass blowing, it doesn't happen so much in glass fusing, but when you do glass blowing, stuff falls on the floor a lot. So you learn a certain level of non-attachment with things.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So were you able to use the scraps and repurpose them into jewelry or anything else?
So I could. The gallery actually, like, I asked them to hold this stuff for me, and then I have forgotten when I've been there to say, did you throw that away? Sometimes the insurance company makes you send it in if they understand that it's reusable, because you're basically, it's like totaling your car, right? Like, yeah, so I'm not sure. It's something that I need to remember to ask about, because yeah, I could definitely make jewelry out of, and maybe even some small dishes out of the smaller pieces. One of the things that's challenging with glass is, like, we always want to save it. This glass is very expensive. You know, it's like we all want to recycle all the glass we use, but you end up having a lot of labor to repurpose pieces of glass. So, you know, I'm not sure, because people think, oh yeah, well, you already got paid for it, now the materials are free. It's like, it still would be a lot of work. But yeah, they may have it. At this point, this was like 2 years ago, it might just be gone. I do have, though. And Jen, you have to let me know if we start to run tight on time. I'm easily distractible. So here's leftover pieces from when I made it. So there's one of these, and then I've got a lot of offcuts. So there's definitely more that can happen. Here's some edges of it. This is like the stuff I cut off from the irregular edges while I was making it. And I don't think it's in the slideshow, but it is on my website. This is about half the scraps that I had. So I have already made like one larger piece out of these scraps. I've moved a couple of times in the last few years, and I keep trying to downsize, but there's some things I just can't manage to get rid of. All right, let's see here. So I also, during the residency, worked on, I wanted to try to make these leaf-shaped Marini. And this was the plan, that I would do a different color for each season. And I initially thought I would like put them all together in one panel. I ended up making 4 panels. So for this process, I started out by making a thing that was shaped like a leaf. And then I poured, it's a little difficult to understand, but I poured plaster silica around that first leaf. That first leaf was clay, because what I really want is a hole that's shaped like a leaf that I can put sheet glass into. So I started stacking the sheet glass, and I had done an initial test that was smaller, but because the sheet glass is already 1/8 of an inch thick, I couldn't make a lot of lines if I started smaller. So I had to start big. So this thing is like 6.5 inches across. And it got very heavy. So there's the mold all packed with glass. And then after it's fired in the kiln, here it is. And you can see it shrunk down a lot. All that airspace in between the pieces, the glass kind of shrunk down to fill it. So then I cut the ragged edges off this, and I took it back into the glassblowing studio, and I heated it up again. and I picked it up on the end of this pipe. And then I discovered that it was really, really too heavy for me. You know, because you're holding it on the end of a stick and the close end of the stick is hot, you have a lever action where it gets very, very heavy. I managed to do it. It was a challenge. The other challenge was, as I heated it, I needed to maintain the leaf shape. Usually in glassblowing, we roll things on a table, so round is very easy. Leaf shape is slightly more challenging. But I did manage to do it, and we pulled it out into a bar, and I've still got a chunk of that bar right here. There were skinnier parts and thicker parts. I don't know if I'll ever get rid of this because it's so great. So I made these panels. So I did that four times. It was really hard each time. And I made these guys. These are the leaf panels. Here's a close-up on the fall or the winter one, and the summer one, which I think was totally my favorite. So on the wet saw, I didn't count how many slices, but it was a lot of slices. I sliced a lot of glass. And then
How big is that piece? Total?
That's 12 by 12. So this is actually, like, this is probably bigger than any leaf on that panel. I'm just looking here, right? I didn't end up using this because it was bigger. And I stacked them all on there kind of loosely overlapping, which was sort of like having this weird domino house. And then I fired it to a temperature where they just stuck together and kind of bent and curved around one another, but didn't really blend or lose their shape at all. And there's a detail.
Wow.
What are the white flecks, please?
The white flecks are just the reflection. You know, glass, because it's shiny, is really a challenge to photograph.
I thought maybe it was snow or something.
No. Could be though, right? That could be, that I could do a new series where there's snow on them. Yeah, it's just the hot spots.
Okay.
So another, this one is sort of a commission, sort of not. When I was teaching at Maryland Hall for the Creative Arts in Annapolis, that also houses the Annapolis Symphony. They were having their 50-year anniversary, and they wanted artists to paint violins. So they asked me to do one, and I said, well, I don't paint. Could I, like, take the violin apart and make glass parts for it? And they said, sure. I said, well, I'm going to destroy it. Is it okay? They said, yeah. So they gave me this violin, and I started by taking off the face and the back. Then I took the face and the back, and I poured, again, a plaster silica mold. So we add silica to the plaster because it makes it heat resistant. If we just used plaster, when we fired it in the kiln, it would just turn back to dust. So I'm pouring a plaster silica mold off the back of the violin there, so you can see it. And then for this one, just took clear glass, and I draped the clear glass over the plaster. These cracks that you see in here are in the plaster and not in the glass. And this is one of the kilns. I think we were talking about that. They're just like a big giant toaster oven that gets really super hot. So then I had all of this edge that overhung the violin face. I cut that off on a wet saw. So if anybody's familiar with a tile saw, you can see it's just a tile saw. Got to go nice and slow so you don't crack the glass. So there I set the pieces up to see if it would all fit together. It's not attached yet. And then I decided to put on like this sort of swirly wood grain pattern that you guys have seen a lot in my work. I thought here it could be water, but it could also just be music, right? If you can imagine the musical notes. I'm making a resist out of a sandblasting resist called Buttercut that's really, really thick. So it will go on the glass and protect the glass. And then I put the glass through the sandblaster. Everywhere that had the masking on it stayed shiny. Everywhere that didn't got frosted. And they were kind of interesting like this, but I wanted to add some color. And I didn't want the expense of colored glass because this was something that's not a functional dish that you're going to eat off of or even really wash a lot. I spray painted the insides of the violin faces with gold spray paint. And then and I did it two different ways. This one, of course my phone is ringing. This one is sandblasted on the interior side. This one is sandblasted on the exterior side. I didn't know what would look better, so I tried it both ways. So there's a close-up. That's the one that's sandblasted on the inside, which was definitely the way to do it. And there is the finished violin. So they sold that for their fundraiser auction in, I think, 2012. And I had a great time making it, and they were interested in having more. So I agreed for this one. It was a complete donation, and they let me come to their fancy ball. I said, well, if I do it again, you know, I'm going to need to get paid. So we split the money, and I did it for 2 more years. So this is some of those canes that we talked about. These ones are glassblowing canes, but it's the same principle where, you know, you make like a block of glass and then you twist it. So these are all those canes. People ask if you can play them, and I mean, you could, but that's not really how they're designed. They're kind of heavy, and they don't actually have the sound holes in the face that go all the way through. So I don't think they'd sound very good. The next year, their theme was like Roman holiday or something. I don't know. There was like some wine thing, and I'd already been planning to make something with leaves. So I did these ones with grape leaves, and there's the back of that one. And then that was 3 years for the Annapolis Symphony Orchestra. A friend of mine who was in the National Capital Art Glass Guild also sat on the board of the James Renwick Alliance, and they are the people that do all the fundraisers for the Renwick Museum in DC. And she said, oh, we're having this thing. It's like art and craft of music or something. You should come, you should show your violins. I want to get the Renwick Alliance interested in it. So I did that, and they asked me to make them one for their fundraiser, which I did. So that year, their fundraiser was happening at Spring Craft Weekend in DC, and it was during the Cherry Blossom Festival. So I thought I would return to this cherry blossom motif that I've done before, so that, you know, we could have a tie-in with that. And that's the back. I think I like the back the best on that one. And then there's a nice detail. So there's those copper foil cherry blossoms. We've got the sandblasted texture and the iridescent glass there. So here's a picture of my craft show booth from, I think, the last time I did the American Craft Council show. In 2014, I moved to Fredericksburg. I got married and had a baby. So my focus shifted for a little while. So I haven't done a craft show since 2014, which has been kind of nice. I think I might do one. I might do one this fall, but it's a challenge. I don't know if any of you guys try to sell your artwork. You know, making it is one thing. Selling it is just a whole other job entirely. So I've never had a huge amount of success at that, despite exhibiting at a lot of shows. I do commissions. So I've got just a handful of things. These were I had some friends that were into vintage scooters. So they have scooter rallies, and they wanted to have these scooter trophies. So these are, you know, different like gears and things from scooters that I cast into glass, and then we sandblasted the text on it. I did this one a couple of years ago for a community garden in my neighborhood for their food truck rodeo. This is a piece of recycled glass because the garden is very, very big on recycling and sustainability. I did some awards for the Fredericksburg Economic Development Agency. They do small business awards every year. So I made a couple of those for them. But I haven't done a whole lot of creative work over the last couple of years because all my creativity is being spent raising a little person. I did get a nice commission a couple of years ago. We talked about a couple of different things, and it ended up that stained glass was the right technique to use for this. And I have not trained in stained glass. A lot of people who do glass fusing come from stained glass, but I came from hot glass. So I also got to learn some new skills on this one. I made these panels here, and they were installed in the like structural bracket for this gazebo. And this is at a house in Lake Anna. They came out really good. It's just like a jewel box when you're inside it there. That was super fun. Over the last year, I've managed to actually get my studio organized because I've been home a lot. So that's been really exciting. And I've been playing with some new things. Some of these techniques are ones that I was experimenting with for classes that I was teaching. So I've done some dishes and also Christmas ornaments that are modeled after microscopic diatoms, which have radial symmetry to them. I did some experiments just trying to make some things that look like coral. And some of these canes that we were talking about, where we watched the video, you can see the canes are the middles here of these coral reef things. These were really fun. I was trying to make some demonstrations for a class I was teaching and was trying to think of shapes that would work well for the technique. And I thought, I wonder if I can make Monstera leaves. They came out really, really great. And these are in a show at the Strathmore Mansion, north of DC. I think I've got to take them up there in a couple of weeks. So that's kind of exciting to be dipping my toe back into the water of making things and trying new stuff and being creative again. All along, I've been teaching, and that's something that I have done since I was a kid. I started doing origami when I was 8 years old, and the next year we read Sadeko and the Paper Cranes in fourth grade, and they make paper cranes in that book. So I taught the class how to make paper cranes. And then I went back every year for 3 or 4 years back to the fourth grade class to teach them how to make paper cranes. In the glassblowing studio, it was the first way I was able to get paid for my work there was to teach glassblowing classes. So I started doing that right off the bat. This picture is of my demo table, probably in the middle of a week-long class in Corning. So this is like full class chaos, which I love very, very much. We're making pattern bars over here and working on geometric patterns. I have taken a lot of classes in Corning. I think I said earlier, I did most of my education for glass fusing has come from being a teaching assistant. I've only ever taken one glass fusing class, but I've been a teaching assistant for many, many, many people. It's a lot of fun up there. I think also in 2010, I taught my first week-long class, and it's kind of an amazing experience because you're there teaching alongside maestros from Italy and just master glass artists who are there to teach their specific techniques. In Annapolis, I started a glass fusing program at Maryland Hall for the Creative Arts. I've taught at a lot of smaller studios and private studios. I taught at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. The furthest I got to go for glass is I taught in Istanbul. There's a whole like sort of summer campus style studio outside of Istanbul. And that was great. I would like to go back and do that again at some point. And then when I moved to Fredericksburg, I started a glass fusing program at Liberty Town. I don't know if anybody knows Liberty Town. So these next pictures are of student work, just a quick sampling of stuff that I had on my computer. A lot of it's beginner work. This one isn't. This one is somebody who's definitely taken a couple of classes. In the pre-pandemic time, I offered four-week classes at Liberty Town, where it would be introduction to glass fusing for 4 weeks, and then, glass fusing 2 for another 4 weeks. Supplemented with that, I have a lot of project classes. So these are some coasters that were made in a workshop. This was probably a 2.5-hour workshop. Nobody had any experience. This is what they made in the class. And I'm still doing these types of project classes at Liberty Town until the COVID maximums, until the distancing requirements are repealed. I can't really do a lot of long format classes at Liberty Town. There's just not room. I am teaching some at the Workhouse in Lorton, if anybody is familiar with them. And I'm going to start teaching at the Visual Arts Center of Richmond too this summer. So it's very, very exciting. But right now, if you guys wanted to try this is the sort of thing we have at Liberty Town. I think that's a coaster. It might be the top for a box. These were people with no glass fusing experience at all. Here's some, in the summertime, they're called sun catchers, and in the winter, we call them Christmas ornaments. And we do a whole lot of workshops with these, some night lights, which are super fun. And I think this class is coming up. This one's stacked squares. So this is, again, the work of beginners. This person is working off of my example right here. And this is just like a 2-hour class where you come in and pick your colors and learn to cut glass and put together a concentric square dish just like this. And I think that's my last picture. All right. Thank you.
Wow.
Yay.
That was amazing. Thank you.